Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Advancing Drug Development with Digital Health. I am Lisa Henderson, the editor of Applied Clinical Trials, and I will be your moderator today. To start off, we have a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next few business days. We are going to ask you 2 polling questions during the webinar, and we'll follow the panel discussion with an audience Q&A session. Please take the time to answer the poll questions as they come up, and you can also submit your questions during or after the presentations by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found by clicking on the red Q&A widget at the bottom of the presentation window. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small green icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any questions, you can click on the question mark widget. We have great speakers from leading companies in the space today. Joining us from Medidata is Joe Dustin, Principal of Mobile Health. We have Dr. Zubin Epin, who is Assistant Professor of Medicine at Duke University, Medical Director of the Duke Heart Failure Same-Day Access Clinic, Department of Medicine Director of Education IT Innovations, and Department of Medicine Director of Clinical Improvement. And from Validic, we have Drew Schiller, who is Chief Technology Officer and the co-founder. Before we begin the presentations, we're going to let the speakers give you some of their backgrounds. So, Drew, if you want to start with you, please tell us a little about yourself, your organization, and what your company is doing in this space.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. So, yeah, that's right. I'm the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at Validic. And Validic is the healthcare industry's leading platform for connecting patient-generated health data from digital health apps, wearables, in-home medical devices. And we standardize and normalize that data and provide one simple connection to healthcare organizations. So what this means is that we work with a lot of of course, the wearable devices, the medical and wellness apps, and then also the FDA Class II devices that patients might have in their home to remotely manage conditions. So blood pressure monitors, glucose meters, pulse oximeters, spirometers, really anything that a patient is generating outside the 4 walls, we work to bring that back in. And on the healthcare side, we work with hospital systems, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, contract research organizations, population health management companies, and a lot of consumer wellness companies, really anyone who's looking to comprehensively understand the full view of the patient. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, Joe. And Zubin?
Hi, everybody. My name is Zubin Epin, and I'm a cardiologist and clinical researcher at Duke University. I'm particularly interested in chronic disease management and run a clinic called the Duke Heart Failure Same-Day Access Clinic. And my interests are really in terms of moving care from the hospital to the clinic and now into the home to try to help patients lead better lives at home without having to return to the hospital on a frequent basis as heart failure patients do. As you can imagine, digital health is an important part of the future of how we'll take care of chronic diseases like heart failure. And so this talk, I think, is near and dear to my heart. I also am involved as a faculty lead for the Innovation Center at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, and I'm involved in clinical trials that use some of these devices to better connect patients to the trials that they're participating in to get new types of patient-centered information. So this is an exciting area for both care delivery and clinical research, so I'm happy to join.
And Joe?
Hello, my name is Joe Dustin, and I'm the Principal of Mobile Health at Medidata. At Medidata, we're the leading cloud-based technology company used to power more than 50% of the clinical trials run on the planet. Our mission is to power smarter treatments and healthier people, using this type of innovative technology to run the hard part, which is actually getting your data together in one place, making sense of it to find out if these treatments are providing the benefits to patients that is the whole point of trying to develop new treatments in the world. In my role, I've held various roles over the past 14 years running clinical trials from a technologist point of view, but today my role at Medidata allows me to work with technology that captures the patient's voice. I work on a solution called the Patient Cloud, which is a solution within our platform. And this consists of technology that captures subjective and objective data from patients directly. So we're talking about electronic patient-reported outcomes. We're talking about instrumenting patients with sensors and wearables and other types of apps that might be tailored specifically to a disease, to a specific drug, that ultimately might provide that experience at the end as we cross over from research into healthcare for that sort of around-the-pill experience, to capture the patient voice through the development process of a drug onto actual prescription and care in the world. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Great. So thank you, and we'll begin. Let's start with a background with digital health, which is not only changing the way patient data is collected in healthcare, but it's also disrupting the way the pharmaceutical industry gathers data from clinical trial participants. In fact, market trends indicate that by 2020, the pharma industry will be entirely reshaped by digital health. Some companies have already begun this transition, while others are unsure how to start implementing a digital health strategy. In today's webinar, the speakers will cover 4 specific areas where pharma can begin leveraging patient-generated data from increasingly ubiquitous digital health devices. But we probably should start with the definition of digital health because it's kind of broad and people see it different ways. So Drew, the phrase digital health, I guess it gets thrown around a lot. What is digital health and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So digital health is one of those terms that is so broad that it really doesn't have one clear definition. I look at digital health as more of the strategy for how we can leverage technology to improve patient and healthcare communication. So in the pharma clinical trial space, I think that that digital health has the opportunity to both enable and facilitate better communication between patients and the clinicians who are conducting the trials, as well as reducing the cost by taking out some of the manual effort that is typically done by humans. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities that we'll dig into, but really I think of digital health as the enabling technology for improving communication.
Great. Zubin, did you want to offer your view?
Sure, I agree with Drew and Lisa. I think you're right. It's a very broad concept in terms of digital health, and broadly, one could consider this as the use of information and communication technologies to help address the health problems and challenges faced by patients. And that could be really in 2 different realms that we may talk about today, one being clinical research, and how do we advance the care of patients through the development of new drugs, devices, and management strategies, and to be able to harness some of the information that comes from these devices and use it in a meaningful way to answer important questions in clinical trials is one of the opportunities that digital health provides. And then also doing this in the care delivery perspective to better connect patients with either their providers or caregivers to make sure that they can manage chronic diseases like heart failure or get care when they need it is another important opportunity. So this connection that digital health provides by using information technologies to transmit information is useful in various aspects of healthcare today.
Great. And Joe, what do you think?
I think digital health is an umbrella term. I think it means multiple things. So if you go out there and look for the definition, you'll find many. But in my mind, so like I sit more on the mobile health side, and mobile health is a child of digital health, I would say. Mm-hmm. And it ultimately rolls up to the ability to get data to be interoperable, to be shared with anyone who needs it in a controlled and private manner, right? I think digital health is the key to putting patients in control of their own data, in control of their own health, both in experimental treatments and in healthcare. And I think that the ability for sensors, for wearables, for just health data in general to be digitized, get it off a piece of paper and put it in a place that can be analyzed by machines, can unlock possibilities that we've never seen in generations. And the ability for us to speed new types of treatments to market with the advent of digital health, it will happen faster in the next 10 years than it has in the past 100 years. And I think that this is the secret. So to me, digital health is it means a lot of things, but to me it means unlocking the real potential for patients to be more in more control.
It is an exciting time. We are going to take a few minutes for the first poll to get a feel of where the audience is with their digital health strategy. So that poll will come up, and the question is your organization's digital health strategy on schedule? And there we go. And your choices are, yes, it is on schedule, no, it is behind schedule, or you don't have a strategy in place yet. So you can click on your answer and hit submit, and this is going to be, it takes a little while, for the data to come through. So question again, you see on your screen, is your organization's digital health strategy on schedule? Yes. No, it's not, or you don't even have a strategy in place yet. So let's just take a few moments, let the audience submit their answers, and we'll see where you're all at. I wish I had Jeopardy music. Oh, here we go. Oh, wow. So we have 35% that are on schedule, 25% who are behind schedule, and 40% that have no strategy in place. So just to comment from my point of view at Applied Clinical Trials, digital health is still in a nascent stage. However, I see this improvement here with at least they have a schedule. So that's a sign that we're moving forward in this industry.
Lisa, this is Drew. If I can,
Sure.
comment on this really quick. So what's interesting about this is that last year, in Q2 of last year, Validic conducted a global study with this exact same question, and this was an opportunity for us to just sort of do a little checkpoint. And what we found at that point was about 2/3 of the global organizations we surveyed said that they were behind or did not yet have a comprehensive mobile strategy, and it looks like we're still at that point. So that's a really interesting gauge, I think, for where we are as the industry, still trying to figure out exactly what the applications are and how we can leverage this information to improve the business outcomes.
Right. So that's a really good point, because you have, in this talk, we're going to dive into 4 specific ways that maybe they can start with, right, in digital health to be used in clinical trials. So that's where we're going to go now. So thanks for the observation, Drew. The first specific use case for digital health in clinical trials is subject recruitment. And recruitment and enrollment, as the people who practice the trials painfully know, consume about 1/3 of the time allocated to the average clinical trial. So, Drew, how do you think digital health can be used specifically in enrollment, and can it help streamline processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question and a great place to begin. So digital health is already starting to reshape how recruitment happens. And of course, there's a lot of great work being done with Apple Health Kit, Apple Research Kit, which is phenomenal. And I'm hoping that Zubin might be able to touch on some of the work that Duke has been doing, because I know they've been really leading the charge on some of the Research Kit initiatives. And one thing, though, I'd like to really highlight is a recent study that came out. It's called the Brighton study. I believe it was out of Washington, the state, the University of Washington. And what this was is it was a mental health study for depression that was looking at, hey, is it possible that we can conduct? It's typically very difficult to recruit and engage depressed patients or patients with depression. Is it possible for us to do this entire study mobile? So the recruitment via mobile, all of the inventories via mobile, all of the follow-up. And so what the study did, they wanted to recruit 150 patients, and they started using Facebook and other social media channels to recruit these patients. And typically, it would take 6 to 9 months to recruit this many patients for a study like this, possibly up to a year. They recruited their 150 patient goal in a week. And within 4 months, they had, I believe it was somewhere around 2,900 participants. So that was an incredible opportunity for them to now engage a much larger population. What was interesting is that throughout the study, as they were engaging the patients, engaging the subjects in the trial, they did find a slightly lower response rate. So it was about a 65% response rate as opposed to what they would typically expect at 85%. But when you're dealing with, an order of magnitude or greater more participants in the study, that's actually an acceptable risk. And it was actually a much lower cost study to run because the trial recruitment took such a short amount of time, and there was very little human involvement because the technology was actually driving most of the questions. So that was a very interesting example, I think, of how we can leverage digital health to improve the recruitment experience. Another quick example I want to give is actually my wife, who is a clinical psychologist. She runs clinical trials at the University of North Carolina in the psychiatry department. And she's, for her work right now on her NIH grant, she's replicating and building on a study that was done at the National Institute of Mental Health about a decade ago. And it's a very, very challenging population to recruit because these are women who've had postpartum depression before with very, very specific criteria. And it took the NIMH, I believe, about 30 months to recruit 16 participants, 16. And my wife recruited 32 participants in 11 months. And so and that was using Facebook and targeted social media ads. So there's a real opportunity to leverage social media and other digital technologies to reach the right patient populations that can really short-circuit the recruitment time needed to get the population base.
That's a really promising example. It really is. Zubin, did you want to comment on the use of digital health in the subject recruitment space?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to, Lisa. And I think Drew's example is a very telling one and not an uncommon one. I think we see in clinical trials this issue of recruitment and enrollment, which actually consumes about 1/3 of the time allocated to the average clinical trial. I mentioned I work at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, which is the world's largest academic research organization. And our mission is to develop and share knowledge that improves the care of patients around the world through innovative clinical research. And towards that mission, we conduct multinational clinical trials, and some of these are large, expensive trials, and so you can imagine that any way that you can improve enrollment would be helpful towards making these trials more efficient and more effective. Some of these trials can cost as much as $400 million. And oftentimes it's because we can't find the patients who are eligible for these trials that can help advance the care of patients like them. You may be familiar with the flyers that you see on a bulletin board where people can take a number to call if they want to enroll in a clinical trial. And in this day and age, when we need more speed and rapidity with which we enroll patients, we need to have better ways of reaching them. And so Drew mentioned that ResearchKit is one good example of how we might be able to do this. Duke has launched a few of these apps, one being Autism and Beyond, to reach children and their parents who may be concerned of autism to help them better understand and identify risk for development. And we are also working on another one called the 6 Vital Sign, which is helping to globally understand what functional status looks like across a worldwide population. And in all of these trials, you can imagine that whether it's a broad question like how active people are, or it's a rare disease that somebody might need to enroll in, having a better way of reaching patients through ResearchKit or through other digital health approaches is a great way of being able to reach patients in a rapid manner, and also to create a more broadly representative population. We don't want to be so selective as to just enroll the patients who are maybe responding to flyers. We want to be able to have a representative population of patients that will enroll in a clinical trial, because if we do so, then that means that the evidence that we generate through those clinical trials for a drug, device, or management strategy will be more generalizable and translatable to the real world afterwards, so that we can make sure that evidence really does find its way into practice.
Excellent.
Yeah. Hey, Zubin, this is Drew. If I can just add one quick thing to that, because it made me remember I was at the I was at the White House for the Precision Medicine Initiative announcement a few weeks ago, and before President Obama came on, they were hearing stories from real individuals, a lot of them citizen scientists who had done some of this work on their own to help their families or help their loved ones. And this father got up on stage and told this story about how his son has this incredibly rare condition where he can't cry, like his tear ducts don't emit tears. And there are other symptoms, but that was the physical symptom. And it's such a rare condition that once they finally diagnosed him via genetic sequencing, the physicians did not know of any other cases in the world. This was the only case they actually knew of and that was current today in the world. And so they had no ability to actually study the treatment mechanisms for this because it was a patient of one. And so the father, who's a computer scientist, took to the internet and built basically his own recruiting tool and found that there were 100 other people in the world who also had this, who he was able to attract. And it was representative of every continent, with the exception of, obviously, Antarctica. So just a very fascinating way that today, when physicians are looking out at this space or clinicians, researchers are looking out at this space, it may seem like we have a really extremely rare condition with nobody. But now when we open up to a global perspective, we can actually find a lot more people to potentially better study some of the more unique and challenging conditions.
I think that's absolutely true. If I may just add to that really briefly, I think you just summed up the entire evolution of medicine in one story. If you think about the old days, really physicians made observations on an N of 1. They saw a certain patient with a condition and they described that as a case study. Then we moved towards finding a collection of patients maybe at a single center and describing what a cohort of patients might look like and what their characteristics around 10 or 100 patients might look like. Soon we moved into multi-center registries and clinical trials, which first were across the country and now across the globe, so you could truly describe a patient population. And I see digital health as the next step in that evolution, where if we are truly going to characterize and find these kinds of patients, we're able to better identify them across the globe. So this is the next step, I think, in a lot of ways of being able to identify and recruit not only patients for clinical trials, but help them connect to other patients, just like that father did for his son.
Yeah.
Hey, so this is Joe. Let me put some numbers around this for you. So recruitment is hard. It's really hard. It's probably, as you both have said, it's probably one of the things besides clinical monitoring that probably is one of the highest budget items in a clinical trial. And I think not only does it cost money, it takes time, which is even more expensive, I think, in some cases. But let's put some context around what could happen if not only the recruitment strategy changes, but the entire design of the trial changes, right? Because you can't just try and change a recruitment strategy once the people get on the trial, they have to still go through the same old way that we've been doing for so long. It might not necessarily retain them very well. So at Mount Sinai in New York, they're one of the people that did one of the first research kit apps for asthma. And Medidata did an event at the New York Academy of Sciences late last year where different folks from various academic and pharma institutions came to speak about the work they've done. The folks from Mount Sinai came and presented on their research kit app and presented some numbers. So let me put this in context for you. In the first 6 months, 50,000 people downloaded the app off the Apple App Store for asthma. It's the asthma app. It's still there. You can go download it today. From that time, over some period, there was a dip where patients just kind of dropped off. They downloaded it for interest. There was a lot of press around it. Apple, WWDC sort of announced the whole thing. And, only about 15,000 people or so consented. Right, so 50,000 to 15 consented, and then at the end of about 6 months, about 8,600 people were actually contributing data, actually were qualified and had asthma, and were freely giving them data from their own phone, completing surveys, hooking in, other types of activity sensors and data that can contribute to the app. They just enrolled and recruited 8,600 people without any sites. This is a monumental shift in the way things work. But it also means the design is totally different, right? You're not relying on sites and advertising and the resources on the ground in various regional areas of the world to recruit subjects, you're relying on technology. And the technology backend and the infrastructure needed to do that is fundamentally different. You don't have a clinical database with a subject that then has procedures done and case report forms entered. It's totally different. It's a subject that downloads an app on their phone and they go through an e-consent process and something before they even end up in a database anywhere. So where does that data go? There's a lot to think about in the new world of running a clinical trial, and it starts with how do you find the patients? And this is part of digital health that's really exciting. That's going to, I think, take down the barrier to entry for a lot of clients. A lot of pharma customers as well. When I say pharma, I mean there is no pharma company yet that has a research kit app in the App Store. If you notice that, it's all academics, and some of the greatest academics in the world have been doing this, including Duke, including Mount Sinai, a number of them. I guarantee you, in 2016. You will see the first pharma companies putting apps in the App Store to fundamentally change the way they do clinical trials. Because this is the only way that they're going to innovate and change the way trials are done. It's happening now. It's really exciting.
It is exciting. It also gets to the use of the terminology. We call it subject recruitment historically in clinical trials, but it's really about the patient and the treatments that they need when they need them. So I appreciate all your views on that, on the use of subject recruitment, and once the patients, I'm going to call them the participants, are enrolled in a trial, there's also the opportunity to continue utilizing digital health to aid in remote patient monitoring. So Zubin, can you talk to us about this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Lisa. And I think that Joe's comments about 2016 maybe being the year where we see some of these apps coming from pharma companies on top of academic organizations may be a reality. And it's not only just for the enrollment and the recruitment piece, but as you mentioned, Lisa, around the remote patient monitoring of patients. And I'm sure Joe can speak a lot to this, but the traditional clinical trial is expensive not only because of the issues around enrollment and recruitment, but also about long-term monitoring and following up of patients. And so the traditional way is that patients have to return to a study site, and then information is collected about those patients on a periodic, if not infrequent manner. Oftentimes what happens is that there's large gaps of information between these study visits where there's no information or any characterization of how the patient might be doing with a drug, device, or treatment strategy. On top of that, there's a lot of patients, particularly ones with rare diseases, for example, where they may live far away from a study site and are not able to make it to some of these appointments. And so this loss to follow-up is a very real issue. So digital health provides a tremendous opportunity of being able to connect with these patients better for real-time characterization of how they may be doing in a continuous, if not day-to-day basis, to fill in those gaps in between study visits and to provide more patient-centered, patient-generated data in between these study visits. And one of the real opportunities, I think, through the devices that we talk about when we talk about digital health is really not only being able to provide more continuous characterization of these patients, but to do so in a quantitative manner. Oftentimes, some of the issues that we face in clinical trials is that the information that is reported to us by patients is subjective and is subject to reporting bias. But being able to quantify the unquantified or to objectify the subjective, I think, is a real opportunity. It helps us understand what a functional status of a patient is like. It could help us understand if somebody's gait, for example, is unstable. It can help us understand their activity. I'll give you one example of how we will be using digital health in an upcoming clinical trial or in a registry. We are working with a pharmaceutical company to understand the effect of their drug on heart rate after heart failure patients are discharged from the hospital. Up to this point, we really haven't had a good idea continuously of what a heart rate data might look like after a patient is placed on this drug, which happens to affect heart rate. This is the first time we'll be able to quantify this on a continuous basis using wearable devices within a digital sub-study to help understand not only how the patients do with the registry as reported at the study visits and through clinical outcomes, but also objectively how does their heart rate and other biometrics change on a continuous basis. That kind of information is going to give us a much better sense of how patients are doing in the long term and help give them and their families the information they need to understand and make the decisions they need to make to improve their health care.
I think
Joe or Drew? I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is Joe. I think the key to remote patient monitoring in the clinical trial is this, right? So if you can get a window into the patient's home without having to have them come into the clinic, which could be 50 or plus miles away from their home, you could reduce patient visits in a clinical trial design protocol, which could reduce costs, it could reduce patient burden. You might keep the patients in the trial longer if they don't have to keep coming into the clinic for things that now you could do at home. Think about Clayton Christensen's sort of Harvard definition of disruptive innovation. Take something that was once highly skilled, highly complicated, can only be performed by trained professionals in a controlled setting, and push that down so that your mother can do it in the home. I'm going to ask you some questions on how you feel. I'm going to strap this tracker on you to give me data about what your body is telling me you feel. And in essence, I'm getting your vitals and I'm getting the context of how you feel, and I don't need you to come see me to do that. Technology allows this to happen. And now you get a new, more continuous data stream that's remotely monitoring patients, looking for signals, looking for anomalies, looking for trends in the data that you might not get at a one-clinic visit where you're in the hospital or in the clinic for an hour getting a test. The classic example is the 6-minute walk test for sort of COPD or different types of lung function. Don't you think I would get a much better picture to how you're performing or how your activity is from a step count perspective from continuously monitoring you with an activity tracker 24/7 for a month versus 6 minutes in the clinic on one day when maybe I don't know how your day was today. You know, it's just a very biased structure, snapshot in time. Yet everyone seems to have the validated. It is the validated standard of care procedure that everyone trusts from a regulatory perspective, from an accuracy perspective. But everyone will always tell you, and I say that the general everyone is clinicians, researchers, clinical trial folks, pharma, they all know that there's a better way to do this. It's just a matter of actually doing it. So monitoring patients remotely at home not only can change the way clinical trials are designed, it can reduce patient burden, reduce visits, which ultimately reduce costs, but it gets you more of a real-world data stream earlier in the process. Think about before you go for your approval at FDA or EMA or whatever regulatory agency in the world, with more streams of data that capture the real-world picture of what's happening in a patient's life at home, and bring that with your submission. What would happen if you went to a payer to get more, negotiate what your reimbursement is going to be, having a lot of that real-world data earlier in the process versus waiting for a 10-year observational study to collect that data? If you had that earlier, wouldn't that, in some cases, hopefully justify a higher reimbursement rate if the data was good, of course, and actually show that you, while on this treatment, you contribute to society more. You're able to go out and travel. You're able to get out and move more. You're able to sleep better. You're able to, all these things are data points that you can't capture in the clinic. You need to have another way to capture that, and digital health can help that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
really
Joe,
good.
I totally agree.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Joe, I totally agree. This is Drew, and I think that one of the interesting things is that you and Zubin and the work that we're doing at Validic are really helping to move this forward. But why isn't the industry quite there yet with us, right? And so I was as you were describing of the things that we could do with all of this information and what opportunities are there. It got me realizing that, or thinking about the fact that we don't yet have a lot of proof about what this means, right? So we don't have yet the inventory to say when you have a patient who has hypertension and you do these things, then you're going to be that much more effective with this medication than without, right? So we don't yet know exactly how this information is going to be valuable. We know that it will be valuable, and we're starting to build the proof points on it. But I think that that's really the biggest challenge that we have as an industry is that we're not quite there yet. And I was speaking with somebody last week who was asking me how pharmaceutical companies can interact with clinicians to improve the patient experience. And I said, well, it would be really great if they could have a validated behavior change app with their medication, because we all know that medication paired with the right behavior change is infinitely more effective than just the medication alone. And she said, well, okay, but didn't we already try that a few years ago and it didn't work? And I said, well, yeah, okay, we tried one thing one time, but how many different, hundreds or thousands of different formularies do we go through before a drug gets onto market before we know that that's the right one? Like, we can't expect that we're going to get digital health right out of the gate every single time. I think a lot of the attempts at building proof today come out, and it's, we're seeing minor incremental improvements or things that are not necessarily enough to offset what's been the gold standard. And I think we as an industry need to keep pushing forward in order to realize the massive shifts that we can see. I think part of it also is going to be that we need to have a little bit of a shift in our thinking. I was speaking with a cardiac physician about 6 months ago, and he was saying that he works with a lot of rural patients in Kansas, and he said that his health system implemented telemedicine so that to make it easier for the commute. And he said, I don't understand what happened. So I was sitting in my office at my house, on the teleprompter. The patient went into the hospital. They were sitting in the clinic looking at the teleprompter with me, and we saw just as many patients not show up. And I said, yeah, that's because you don't understand telemedicine. You can still go to the clinic. It's the patient who you're trying to reach outside of the clinic. It's a total different shift in thinking. And so I think that's what we really need to recognize as an industry.
Drew, this is Zubin. If I can just respond, you brought up a lot of excellent points there, and I want to piggyback off of a couple of those. I think you're right that the industry is not there yet, but is getting there. And I think Joe brought up earlier this importance of interoperability, and I think we'll see in clinical trials that as we are able to merge a lot of the data from digital health with the typical electronic data capture systems that we use in clinical trials, that we may be able to do a better job of incorporating this information to better characterize patients and the treatment effect that they might be getting. And Medidata obviously is at the forefront of this. I'll give you a good example of how we're already seeing some of this information being put to use. There was a study done in the New England Journal of Medicine late last year which showed how patients with heart failure can be characterized by accelerometers that are worn on their hip, and it really helped understand how a certain drug might affect activity levels and functional status. That was a very manual merge of data, and as we make those types of data more interoperable, we'll be able to see this kind of treatment effect on patients in a much easier manner. I think the industry will move forward that way. The second point that I just wanted to make was that I think you're absolutely right about this not only being about connecting patients with studies, connecting devices with other types of information. It really has to involve the behavioral change aspects. And patients are like snowflakes. No two are really alike. And so how do you motivate those patients can be very different based off the behavioral profile of a patient. I'm working with a company, Pattern Health Technologies, to do exactly this with noted behavioral economist Dan Ariely. We're learning how we might be able to understand patients' motivators and be able to use those to affect behavior change and help them better engage in chronic diseases by engaging with these devices that they might wear and use it to better improve their health.
And just to round that out, this is Joe. I think the key to remote patient monitoring and achieving what you just described is data and analytics to be able to take action on the things that you're seeing. You can't do anything unless you can't visualize what's happening. So, like at Medidata, I've been with the team that I've been working on, we've been standardizing a lot of these analytics because to be able to monitor data quality, subject compliance, a number of things that would trigger alerts or whatnot to physicians or study coordinators that are monitoring these patients remotely, need to be able to know where the issues are and target right into those issues right away. And to have the analytics designed in a new way, because now the patients are no longer in a controlled setting anymore. They are now more and more not going to be in the clinic. So we need to have new ways to be able to look at the data and take action on it in faster ways that are visualized and easy to read manners. It's the data that allows remote patient monitoring to really be more effective.
Well, Joe, that gets into the next point, I think. You had said when you were describing about the remote patient monitoring, what if we could take all this data, before the drug is approved and really validate it, that it works well, either, from quality of life standard or from a behavioral standard even. That would be fascinating. But and then they approve the drug. But you're saying you can take that into the post-market research setting. So that is the third area with the shift to value-based care and manufacturers needing to demonstrate efficacy. How do you see this digital health enabling the collection of the data in that setting, the post-market phase, and to keep delivering on the evidence that therapies work?
I think so aside from the other thing that I mentioned around some of the methods that we would use in post-marketing research to be brought earlier up in the value chain, that's something that is a fundamental shift in like phase 2, phase 3 trials, trying to collect more real-world data earlier to use that as part of your submission. But when you get to phase 4 post-marketing research, this is where the whole around-the-pill idea can come to reality, and it's happening now. I'm seeing this with in pharma. It's happening. I'm seeing this from a technology perspective being executed, and they're changing. And this could be from a registry to even something different as an observational trial. But in essence, I'm seeing it more in rare diseases than anything. Is observational research and post-marketing research on rare disease type stuff where the treatment is the only option. It's investigational treatment that is all they have. Is rare disease. There might be 50, 100 patients in the world, right? And it scales well also to thousands and tens of thousands of patients that might be in this type of post-marketing study. But it's a portal. It's a place where patients can go, where they give data, but they also get data back. They can engage with people that are involved in the study, whether it's their physician, whether it's researchers, whether it's other folks across the whole, all the stakeholders. It's a place where they can engage. It's a place where they can submit data. It's a place where they can get data. It's a place where they can have a community. It's a place where they can, just have a place to go to track themselves over a long period of time. Think about some of these rare disease treatments, right? Some of these treatments could be $50,000, $80,000 a year in real life, right? So you're actually paying for it. Insurance is actually paying for it. The drug is approved. And this was at a conference, a panel I was in about a year ago out in Silicon Valley. And someone on this panel that I was on said, if you're paying for this treatment that's about $80,000, you just bought a boat. You should be treated like you just bought a boat. and there's a high-touch customer experience that comes with that we could learn from in the clinical setting. And it's something I think that at least in the U.S., we've been sort of bad at. But if you're paying this much money, you should have a place to go. You should have apps. You should have a place to ask questions. You should have this concierge-style service where you get answers, quickly. It's tracked. You have resources to call on. You have a place to submit data. You have a place to understand how you are doing compared to others. This is the whole around the pill treatment that comes with the drug. It's you're on the drug. You get this experience. This is part of post-marketing research and outcomes-based medicine compiled into one. Because now the ability to keep you healthy in real life is research, is continual research. It innovates and continues to go back and make it better. The only way that happens is to stay engaged. It's not just the world of prescribing you a drug and going away is over. At least in the U.S., and I know this is different in rare disease, but at least in the U.S., if you're back in the hospital in 30 days, you're getting fined. The hospital is getting fined. So it's in more of the incentive to those who are providing care to figure out ways to engage with patients more than they are today. And this is, I think, is a good model in the post-marketing research area to be able to translate that into actual healthcare.
Thank you, Joe. Drew or Zubin, would you like to jump in on the post-marketing aspect?
This is Zubin. I can just briefly mention and allow Drew an opportunity as well. I think this is the real problem that we're facing in American medicine today is this translation of evidence into practice takes too long. And after we've gone through an expensive clinical trial, we find that we haven't had the appropriate uptake of a therapy in appropriate patients. And this is where post-marketing research can be tremendously helpful. And I mentioned one example of a study that we're doing for an approved drug to understand its effects on heart rate, so we understand how patients are taking this and whether it can be a safe and effective treatment in the real world. These kinds of studies that digital health can now make a possibility will help patients better understand what treatments they're taking and their effects on their own condition, their unique, personalized, and precise condition. And to be able to do that, I think, will help us understand what are the barriers to taking medications, what are the issues that are affecting compliance, and ultimately, how do we treat a broader population to improve population health.
Yeah, absolutely, Zubin. And just to add one more quick point, which is that, one of the most difficult things in post-market, really this is all throughout the whole cycle, but in post-marketing is the collection of data. And if you can put, a simple, inexpensive, consumer-grade wearable device on somebody, you can get a lot of very valuable information that frankly wasn't possible before in any scalable format. So you can now know, how well the patient is sleeping, how much activity the patient is having, what their resting heart rate is, potentially what their heart rate variability is. You can get a lot of interesting information that may actually be very, very beneficial down the line that we don't even know about. We don't even know necessarily how activity might correlate with taking one drug over another, but there might actually be a very large correlation. It's just we're not even getting that information right now. So I think that there's an opportunity with very low risk and a very minimal upfront cost to actually get potentially volumes of incredibly valuable information that could lead to new studies and further drug formularies down the market.
Thank you, Drew. The last area that we're going to cover today is integrating digital health into the patient communities. And I think that you've all touched on this in a fashion under each of the other three topics. But with patient centricity being a big focus for pharma and healthcare alike, there are many patient-related benefits of integrating digital health into these patient communities, while pharma can also benefit from sharing the data. So what can you tell the audience about how digital health is being used in these communities and how the patients and pharma can benefit from this? Zubin, did you want to start off with that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to and provide some brief comments on this. I think this is one of the exciting areas of clinical research today is how do we better connect with patients and their communities, and we've talked a lot about how digital health makes that a possibility. Joe mentioned how this is particularly an issue, and so did Drew, around rare diseases and being able to connect patients who previously were very isolated with their rare condition is a big opportunity through patient communities, particularly as it relates to advancing their care through clinical trials. We have some great patient advocacy groups. I'll give you an example of one area that we're working at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. We're working to connect patients and educate patients better around the condition of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition where the heart abnormally thickens. And this is a way for patients to be able to understand their condition better and be able to connect with other patients. So I think these communities help patients with the ability to understand their condition and find other people like them, but also to start engaging in clinical trials. It's a great area to recruit patients who are invested in advancing care for people like them. And it's also a great outlet for knowledge dissemination to build trust among participants in clinical trials. Often we do not provide enough value back to the participants in a clinical trial, and these patient communities are the forums through which we might be able to help the participants understand how a trial is proceeding, what evidence has been generated, and how it affects their care in the future. We do have to be careful around making sure that patients remain blinded in trials, and this has been an issue in the past in terms of them understanding if they're on drug versus placebo, for example. But with the appropriate guardrails, engaging patient communities is an exciting opportunity for digital health in clinical trials.
That's a great point, Zubin. Thank you. Joe, Drew? Patient community comments?
Oops, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, hi, this is Drew. I just want to say really quick, Zubin really hit the nail on the head. I think that patient communities, especially for some of the more chronic and unique diseases, are incredibly important, especially as you take a look from the actual patient experience, which I can't believe that it's 2016 and it's just now that patient experience is becoming really part of our day-to-day discussion points. But it is true that it's very, very difficult to be to have this feeling of isolation as a patient when you have a chronic condition. And I think patient communities for those very specific conditions really can help with a lot of things. And I think it can also help with further understanding the disease itself. So, in fact, some of the work that we're doing with folks at UNC and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, UNC Chapel Hill and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, they built a patient community around Crohn's disease, and it's a very, 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 very interesting community. Folks are connecting their devices, their activity trackers, their weight scales. All of that data is being fed. There's an active forum. People are saying, hey, I noticed that when these things happen, I feel worse. And I noticed that when those things happen, I feel better. And so there's a lot of communication amongst the group. And the researchers who, from the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation who have the grant are actually starting to get new ideas for what they can do to run trials to improve the symptoms and treatment of Crohn's disease, which affects millions of patients around the world. So I think there's a real opportunity with the right targeted environment and the right data collection and analysis to really actually start to crowdsource and get some citizen scientists involved.
Thank you, Joe. So we're going to ask the audience a tough poll because you all offered really great insights into each of the 4 areas that digital health can have an impact. So we're going to ask them what they think. In what area do you think digital health can have the most impact? Subject recruitment, remote patient monitoring, post-marketing research, or the patient communities? And we'll just take a moment to let you vote. If you guys had to go on trial and say what each one was most important, I don't think the jury could pick. You all had such wonderful examples and reasoning. So we'll have to see what the audience thinks. Remote patient monitoring, by far. Well, that's very insightful. We are now going to move on to the Q&A section. So if you haven't submitted your question yet, you can ask the panelists now. As a reminder, you can submit the questions by clicking on the red Q&A widget at the bottom of the presentation window. And Zubin, we're going to start with you with the first question that we have here. What is the FDA's stance on using digital health devices in trials?
Lisa, that's a great question, and I think the FDA understands that this is an area of tremendous opportunity to advance clinical care and clinical research, but it has to be done in a safe and effective way, and to apply regulatory oversight so it doesn't hinder the space but makes it safe and effective, I think certainly where they want to be. They have offered 2 documents of guidance that anybody can look up on their website if they'd like. The 2 that come to my mind, one is a draft guidance. It's still in draft on mobile medical applications. And the second one is a final guidance on electronic source data in clinical investigations. And in this second piece, they do really talk about how you could incorporate digital health devices as well as other forms of electronic source data. And for any use of electronic source data in clinical trials, such as that which would be generated from digital health devices, there really are about 5 different aspects, I think, that they really focus on, and it can be summarized by the acronym ALCOA, like the company. But every device needs to provide source data that is attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And in other words, there needs to be a way to be able to audit data to make sure that this data is as accurate as the source data is saying that it is. So this audit trail is a very important aspect of any digital health device that might be used in a trial. But if it meets those criteria, I think the FDA certainly sees this as a positive thing. At the Duke Clinical Research Institute, I'm helping to start a Center for Digital Health Translation, which is working on this very aspect where we help validate some of these devices in digital health towards the use in clinical trials and be able to show that we can understand the characterization of patients and whether they improve outcomes for patients with other drugs, devices, or management strategies. So this validation and calibration device is a very important aspect but provided that they meet these criteria of providing accurate source data, they can certainly be used from the FDA's perspective towards clinical trials.
Thank you, Zubin. The FDA is always obviously important in this regulated industry. So for the next question, Joe, what types of digital health devices are you seeing pharma use in trials?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a wide variety, and I think it does go back to some of the questions we're seeing here that you guys are submitting, and some of the things that Zubin just said. FDA doesn't necessarily mandate at all that the devices used in clinical trials have to be 510K approved or CE marked or whatnot. It's in many cases recommended, but it all depends on the intended use. So from the pharma side, this is one of the top questions. Does the device need to be approved? Is the device accurate? Is it calibrated? How do you do it? How do you deal with it? What happens if you find data that you can't explain? Things like that. I'm seeing devices being used of all types, but the devices are one thing. The sensors inside the devices are another, right? So from my perspective, activity tracking, accelerometry is probably the number one most popular thing right now. It's the way for pharma to dip their toe in the water to figure out how to use this type of data, okay? So they're tracking movement, they're tracking sleep, they're tracking various types of activity. And the type of data they get is also how granular do you need to be. So I'm seeing a lot of activity on both sides. So think about, I'll use the Garmin as an example. Garmin VivoFit 2 is probably the most popular device that we're getting responses for in Medidata. It has a year battery life. The patient acceptance is very good. They pretty much put it on their wrist and forget about it. Never have to charge it. And you get data streaming from their home in near real time through an app, which is on a smartphone, or from a hub that's in their home, right? Now, you're only getting data in, sort of 15-minute epochs there. So the accuracy of that is quite good, but it's more high-level summary data in a way. And that allows you to track trends over a macro period of time on is the patient getting better? Are they moving around more after some treatment? And you measure pre-dose, post-dose, pre-intervention at baseline, and then onward through months. Now, if you need something more granular, they're looking to devices something like an actigraph or some other types of devices that are potentially FDA approved and are giving you much more granular, high resolution raw data down to seconds of movement, which allows you to do a bit more predictive modeling. And the raw data is what a lot of pharma companies want, so that their data scientists can get in bed down deep and really see what's happening underneath the covers. But that's a really, really high frequency amount of data that may not be necessary for what you want to prove in your trial. Different companies have different feelings on what they want, and it's definitely used for different purposes. Now, the actigraph is very good, but some of the devices that we've seen out there today, they aren't connected to Bluetooth. They're not connected to the internet. They're sort of used and then brought back and uploaded manually. I know there's newer devices coming out that fix that, but again, it doesn't have to be FDA approved, but it depends on what you're trying to do with the data. This is the most common thing we're seeing from pharma today, beyond other types of novel devices that are specific to a therapeutic area. The more general is mostly actigraphy and accelerometry data.
Thank you, Joe. That also kind of leads into the next question because of the challenges that you brought up. So, Drew, with these challenges that surround implementing digital health, how can we combat some of them?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And so I think one of the challenges, and I think I can piggyback off of what Joe and Zubin were saying a little bit, is we don't always need FDA devices. I think that's oftentimes seen as a challenge. But I think what we actually need, we have a lot of the data. So the challenges that we have right now are not often technical. They're much more of business challenges. And so what we need to do is take the devices that we have and validate them as a primary source. So right now, a lot of the information from these devices are secondary. But if you think about it, there's already primary sources such as patient inventories that are not FDA approved, right? Like how I say I slept last night based on my memory. It oftentimes turns out people say, oh, I slept fine, and it turns out that they were tossing and turning for 3 hours in the middle of the night, right? So we're already not getting always great data, and I think we can leverage the devices that we have to actually bring in much better data. We just have to validate them as a primary source. And I think the other thing that we really need to have is a much higher tolerance for failure in some of the digital health work that we're doing. So I mentioned earlier, we're not going to get it right on the first time. And I think that if we take the model of developing with digital health and building digital health into our trials, and we take the same model that we have for actually building the drugs themselves, and we start to iterate, which we can iterate much faster on digital technology than we can in drug development. And we try something and we see how well it worked. And if it didn't work great, we can improve it. And if it works great, we can still improve it. So there's an opportunity to leverage how technology companies think in the clinical trial space and start to iterate much faster and improve the technology, which will be better for everyone. And finally, I wanted to just touch on, I thought it was very, very interesting that in the last poll question that remote patient monitoring was so much more interesting for the group. So I just wanted to give a really quick illustration of how remote patient monitoring can be used. So Validic works with Sutter Health, which is a large health system in Northern California. They have about 3 million patients, and they have a model for managing hypertension with hypertension drugs that they prescribe. And what they do is they put patients in a remote patient monitoring program. They give the patients a blood pressure monitor, a weight scale, and an activity tracker. This data all flows into a dashboard that they built that a care manager looks at. And every morning, the care manager has red, yellow, green. Who do I need to reach out to? So if there's a fluctuation in blood pressure, if there's an increase in weight, there's a decrease in physical activity, or if there's just the patient isn't tracking something altogether, then a clinician can reach out and find out, how's everything going? Are we adhering to the medication? Do we need to make a medication adjustment? Maybe we need to actually bring the patient in because that's not the right medication for them. We need to reevaluate and prescribe something else. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that I would actually consider low-hanging fruit with remote patient monitoring, that we can actually provide much more patient engagement, a much better patient experience, and overall just better adherence to the medication. So thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for those great examples. And Zubin and Joe, also great insights. We did have a lot of questions, and obviously we cannot get to them all. We are out of time. However, the Validic team will follow up with each of you personally on your questions. We thank you for attending this Applied Clinical Trials webinar featuring Medidata and Validic. I'd like to also thank our speakers, Joe Dustin, Drew Schiller, and Dr. Eapen, for participating in today's webinar. As a reminder, the webinar has been recorded. You will receive an email link to the recording in the next few business days. Please invite your colleagues to view this on-demand version by forwarding them the announcement. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.